Good evening and welcome. I'm on my own tonight, as you've probably noticed, because there's nobody next to me apart from the pot plants, and that's about it. Now, we've got a lot of exciting things coming along, and I hope you can join me on these exciting things. But tonight, the programme is entitled "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to a Dictatorship." And I think whatever happens, however grey things are, we can always find humour, because it was humour that helped our ancestors through the most terrible situations in the past. Now, as I've said many times before, I had three uncles who were comedians. And the most amazing thing with them is that they were different type of comedians, and they never overlapped with each other's jokes, even though they were married and obviously lived apart. Oh, well, that was Monty. You knew Monty. They lived apart. They never overlapped their jokes. And nowadays, there's a heck of a lot of source of humour that people are not taking up because they're frightened of upsetting people. But Mel Brooks quite rightly said that humour is bad taste. And he was right. Humour is bad taste. And as long as you don't, when we say upset people, I think there's a situation where good comedians read their audience. And if you're in a situation where people are upset, I mean, you wouldn't crack a joke at a funeral, although my uncles did. Seriously, they did. And well, I have to tell you this is a classic one. When my granddad passed away, at his funeral, the three brothers were there, and my mother was there, and I was pretty young actually, and I didn't go. I had to go to school, and the vicar was going on and on and on, and my uncle turned around and said, "If you don't shut up, the old man's going to open that choffing lid in a minute. So for God's sake, shut up!" And people go. And that's what they was. It was black humour. And I think it was no disrespect to my granddad, because I think he would have creased up with laughter. But when you go back in the past, for example, a perfect example is the Perfumo affair. Now, that was in 1962. And there was a hell of a lot of jokes going around. And I didn't, obviously, I was too young to remember it. I'll show my age a bit now. But a film came out in the 1980s, and I'll go on to that a little bit later. But apparently, so I was told by my parents, my uncles had an absolute field day with it. But first, I'll tell you a serious part about the Perfumo affair that many people may not know. Now, I've looked into it, and this may sound a bit strange, but I think Perfumo was probably one of the last of the real gentlemen. That's right, Scandal Monty. That was what it was called. And now I disagree with his politics, but I had two connections, three in a way. Nothing to do with the family or anything like that, but it's with people I worked with. Now, when Perfumo fell from grace, he helped the poor in the East End. And I worked with an architect who was his architect. And apparently Perfumo helped to get housing and that built. And when he tried to get a taxi drivers, because remember, people were very patriotic in those days, and I'm talking about the 1960s, and the architect I worked with was getting on a bit in years, and this was in the 1980s. And he said he couldn't get a taxi to stop for him. So what he used to do, this architect, used to run out, hail a taxi. Perfumo would be hiding around a corner, open the door, and Perfumo would then rush in, jump in, and off the taxi would go. That's the only way he could get a taxi. But something that Perfumo said to this architect, which I actually carried with me, he said, if you want to get clients to understand anything, don't show them drawings, because most people can't read drawings. And when you see something flat on a drawing, it means nothing unless you're an architect or someone that can read drawings. Always make a model. And this is what this architect told me. And he was right. Yes, if you see a model of something, you think, well, yeah, I can see it. But if you see flat plans, it doesn't really mean very much. Now, I was working with this chap, at the time that Scandal with John Hurt, which was the film about the Perfume affair, came out. So that must have been the 1980s or sometime. And could you excuse me one moment? Terribly sorry, I've got a bit of a dry throat today. There we go, I've got my H2O here. And what happened is the family apparently wrote to John Hurt and the film company when they had wind that this film was going to come out, and they pleaded because, as I say, this architect was quite close friends with Perfumo. They knew each other on first name terms, and he said that the family wrote to the film company, John Hurt, and said, "Look, we've been through enough. Please don't drag our names through the mud again." And they never got a reply from John Hurt or the film company. And of course, the film came out. Scandal. I saw it years ago. I can't really remember it. But that's one connection I had. I also worked with a chap who did he lived in the East End, and he did East End tours in the weekends for a bit of pin money. And he got rich American tourists giving him quite a bit of money, actually. So he got quite a bit out of it. So he was a contract bloke, and because he loved history. And what he did, he actually used to go to Toynbee Hall, which is in the East End, and that's where Perfumo used to go and help the poor. And he knew him on first name terms. And from these two people and from other people, I've gathered that he was a very nice chap. All right, he was a naughty boy in 1962, but everybody makes mistakes. If you don't make a mistake, you don't never made anything. And I get the impression that he was he fell from grace. He fell on his sword, and he helped a lot of people. And this chap who did the tours around the East End said that Perfumo used to roll his sleeves up and do the washing up. And if somebody was being done by a court or anything like that, the council tax, anything, Perfumo would be in there and would back them up free of charge out of his own pocket. So I think he was probably the last of the real gentlemen. I could be wrong, but that's what I get from these two people. That's what I gathered. And not only those two people, but other people that met him as well. They had nothing but praise for him. So there's that one. With Christine Keeler, now, everybody thought at the time, well, I don't know because I was too young, but apparently people thought that she was a prostitute. And apparently she wasn't. She was abused as a child, and she was a good time girl. That's really basically all it is. And she was on Wogan, I think it was, a chat show in the 1980s where they spoke. But now it's joke time, because these are the jokes. Now, I didn't hear these jokes first time round, but I heard them second time round when the film Scandal came out from my uncles. And so if you've got children listening, please put your fingers in their ears or tell them to go out the room for a while. I'll try and be as polite as possible. So, but this is, I probably can't tell it as well as my uncle, but there was another person involved in the Perfumo scandal, and that was, I actually written a name down because I can't remember it. It was Mandy Rice Davis, okay? And there was my uncle told me this in the 1980s, and he said he cracked it in the 60s. He said, now, what's the difference between Mandy Rice Davis and the M1 motorway? There's a few men that haven't been up the M1 motorway. And there was another one. And I think this is, now I know about Christine Keeler. It's a bit wrong, but I'll say it anyway. She's dead, so I can't really, she passed away. Christine Keeler went to the doctor because she thought she had a splinter up a certain part of her anatomy, and the doctor looked up and he says, "That's not a splinter, that's half the cabinet." That was another one. But people had fun. They laughed, and whenever these high ups fell from grace, there's lots of humour. And I think one of the funniest ones, the one that I remember, is the Jeremy Thorpe case. And again, tell the children to go outdoors, will you? Because at the time it was called, because it was a chap called Norman Scott who was involved, and people said, "Oh yes, it's Scott of the Arse Antics." Whoops. And again, my uncles, well, they're a little bit elderly, but they had a bit of a field day, and there was a election going on, and it said, was it vote Liberal? And my uncle scribbled underneath, "Or I'll shoot your dog," because I don't know if you know about the case, but what happened is the short of it is Jeremy Thorpe had an affair with a bloke. Yeah, he was one of those, and he's AC/DC, I think, and a chap called Norman Scott in the early 60s, and Scott started to blab. I don't know when. Might have been, when was this affair? It was in the 70s. It all broke, so it might have been late 60s, early 70s. I don't know. And Thorpe hired an assassin to bump him off, but the assassin was so incompetent that he missed and shot his dog by mistake. Oh, and another joke. They said, was it, how'd you get 3 liberals on the stool? You turn it upside down. But anyway, and Scott and Thorpe, excuse the pun, got away with the case scot-free. Isn't that funny, isn't it? You know, he was in the legal profession as well as an MP, and everybody thought he would. But he had more front than Tesco's, Jeremy Thorpe, because they put the case off in, and he knew it. I think he knew, he must have known he was going to get away with it. They put his court case off because there was an election. He had to go around electioneering. Now, in the newspapers, it was going in all explicit details. You know, Jeremy Thorpe was with Norman Scott and he said, hello, darling, and all this sort of stuff. And I used to read this in the paper every night. I thought, oh, my God, it's a bit lurid. As lurid as they could get in the late 1970s. And there's old Jeremy Thorpe going around Cornwall and Devon. That was his constituency. He's like, hello, how are you? And he used to go around in a helicopter. And no embarrassment whatsoever. Sort of, you know, it's just beyond me. But anyway, he got away with it. So, but you know, and I know, yeah, he got away with it, I bet. And we're not actually having fun anymore. And now let's have a look in the chat room. My word, it's lively tonight. We've got quite a few people online. Hello, Monty. Hello, Millie. Some spread lies and other truth. Who is who? Good evening. And Patsy. Oh, got a nice lot of people here. And I'll try and bring I'm sorry if I don't put everybody's thing in me bob up. It says he was caught his morals, I doubt, where any lower, they would have been his gun. Yeah, probably. And then we got here, what was it? I used to have a bit of a thing for the actress that played her in Scandal, Joanne something or other. Yeah, I did as well. Yeah, she was nice stuff. Yeah, I liked her. She was nice. Who knows? And it was Joan Wally Kilmar was the Scandal actress. Joanne, sorry, Wally Kilmar. I didn't know that. She was a bit dishy, wasn't she? Yeah, I kind of liked her, yes. And then we got here. That's it, Patsy. Yes, I have a terrible memory for names. Oh, that's good. Right. Yes, I'd agree there, Monty. Yes. Trouble is, we can't look at a beautiful woman now and go, isn't she gorgeous? Because it's all political correctness, isn't it? You know. Now, I was going to go on to what I'm hoping to do on a later program is get a real climate scientist on. Now, I'm not talking about a Mickey Mouse Wally, an educated twit who believes in the climate scandal. And Mark sent me through something tonight, Mark Windows, and I'll just read a little bit out. It's very technical, and apparently I'm reading this now off the screen. A couple of scientists, and it's written by a chap called Ned Kikolov. I'm sorry if I pronounced his name wrong. He's got a PhD in physical science, and Carl Zeller, retired PhD, research meteorologist, if I've got the right teeth in. And they've absolutely, I won't read it all because it is very, very intense and it would be more for scientists. But they've actually said that global warming is a load of old tut. And I think that's basically it. And if you're of any intelligence, you can see through it most of the time. Because, you know, as I've said before, if you corner or go politely up to these people who are talking about extinction, you know, the Extinction Rebellion Brigade and all those sort of people, if you say, show me the evidence, what evidence is there? They'll be like a kind of, Now, when Jehovah's Witnesses go into full religious mode, they say, and the Lord said this, blah, 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 and they sort of regurgitate what they've been brainwashed to believe. And if you show them proof that what they've been brainwashed to believe is a load of old nonsense, they'll just reject it. And, cognitive dissonance, you just can't do anything. You're sort of, and really it's wrong to use children to put a false message out. And then you've got, obviously, this Greta Thunderbird, or whatever her name is, Thumpberg, and David Attenborough, who I think he's probably a better actor than his brother, Lovey Deary. Remember Richard Attenborough? Oh, Lovey Deary, that bloke who acted though he didn't act as Gandhi, it was Ben Kingsley, but he directed it. And if you've ever seen the film of how they made the film, you'd be off your seat with laughter, because when they was making it, they said, stand over there, Lovey, do this, Lovey, dearie, and all this sort of stuff. But as I say, I think his brother's a better actor, actually, especially when he sobs his heart out about birds and animals being killed when they're not, and polar bears that have got an illness and are not dying of starvation. There's a population explosion of them. And of course, you've got a bent politician, and then you've got Brian Cox, who is, in my personal view, allegedly an educated twit, who's got as qualifications as long as your arm, but can't really put it to anything practical. People are believing that when thousands, and yes, I think it's about 4,000 scientists have signed a petition saying that there's not a scrap of evidence that humans are doing anything to the climate. But, you say that to the people that are brainwashed, and I won't repeat what I've said before, but what we're going through now is there's a lot of similarities with the Cultural Revolution that Mao had. He used children to protest, and the government backed the protesters. So that says it all, doesn't it? Now, the other point I was going to bring up, which is very controversial, and I've got to be very, very, very careful the way I say this, because you can slip the tongue and I could be in danger. Now, first of all, I like people. I think most people, regardless of their religion, race, or whatever, most people are okay. I've worked with all different nationalities. Can you excuse me just 1 second? I need my glove. I've worked with, well, you name it, I've worked with them. And most of the time, most of the people I work with, I'm not being snobby here, but they were middle class. And there's an old saying, if the whole world was middle class, there wouldn't be any wars. But a lot of them could see through the hype, because I don't know whether it's freelance people or what it is, but I don't know, it's a bit that sort of rebellious streak in us. But even as long ago as the 80s, you could see that there's something not quite right going on. Now, the way I look at it is the average person, regardless of who they are, is generally okay. There's not a problem. It's the higher echelons. It's the, if you want to call them the Illuminati, New World Order. They are the scum, regardless of religion, race, or whatever. And I think that when people can look and say, look, hang on a minute, we're being used, and it doesn't matter who or what you are. I mean, for instance, mass immigration. Now, immigrants are being used as a pawn, and it's wrong. They've been dragged away from their homes on this false hope, and it's really for an agenda. So when I speak about immigration, I'm not against immigrants. I'm sorry, I'm not against people from other countries, but those people should be in their countries, building their countries up, not having their culture destroyed and our culture destroyed. And that's it, end of. That's the way I look on it. So it's not the people I'm upset about, it's the agenda I'm upset about. And of course, amongst all races, I mean, you on YouTube and not YouTube, Facebook, you see pictures of Muslims, Africans rioting through a street. Well, yeah, you'll always will have that type. I mean, look at the soccer hooligans. You know, there's always the hooligan brigade. But again, they should be doing it in their own country, not here. And I think also with hooligans, they should be doing it in their own country, not here. But really, you know, I now my colours to the mast. I'm not against anybody. It's the manipulators at high level that are doing the bad things. So I'll make that very, very clear at the beginning. I'm not anti this, anti that, anti other thing. I'm not a member of any organisations. I don't go to any talks of any organisations. I'm an independent person and a free thinker. And what I'm about to say is something that happened in World War II that had a knock-on effect after the war and to present day. And again, I'll be careful what I say now. What people don't realise is that you won't find this much in the history books, although it was slightly mentioned in a film that was made in 1958, the original film Dunkirk, with, believe it or not, Lovey Deary and John Mills in it. I'm not talking about the new remake. I'm talking about the original one. And Lovey Deary said, there's some people in this war that are making a lot of money, but people don't talk about it, something like that. And apparently, a lot of people in the cinema at the time, so I've been told, cheered because they knew what was going on. So I'll let you into a little secret of what really went on. And this is from what happened in my family. Okay. Now, my mother's, now I worked this one out. My mother's mother, which would be my grandmother, her sister found the love of her life, a gentleman who they were absolutely devoted to each other, and they had a son. And what happened is he had his own furniture business at the beginning of World War II. Now, in those days, most stuff, you think of how furniture businesses were turned over to war work. Although the Americans had steel ammunition boxes, at that time, Britain still had timber ones, they had wooden ammunition boxes. Rifle butts needed to be made. A lot of aircraft, like the Hawker Hurricane, that was part timber built. Loads and loads of things were made of timber, because we got the timber in, well, originally from Norway and Canada, but most of it was shipped in from Canada, and obviously there's some from Scotland. So it was a material which was probably more plentiful than steel in many ways. So if you was in the furniture business, well, okay, now because he had his own business, he was registered as a reserved occupation, even though he was of military age. And then someone came along. I've got to be very careful, but I think you'll be able to read between the lines on this. Somebody who was in the know, shall we say, and had connections within a small group of people who, I'll just put it that way, okay? Because I don't want to be booted off YouTube, and I don't really want to appear on Hope Not Hate films, so I'll just say a small group of people. And he put my I suppose it'd be my great uncle, out of business within a couple of months. And of course, he got his call-up papers. He went into the Navy, and he was on a minesweeper called the Stella Capella. Isn't that a strange name, Stella Capella? And apparently, it was a converted trawler. And he said to my mother when he was on leave, he said, "I don't think I'll be returning." He said, because this is a very dangerous mission, we're going on. And suddenly the telegram came through the letterbox to my, so it'd be my great aunt, will it be? I suppose my grandmother's sister. So it would be great aunt. Missing, believed, killed. And she was absolutely devastated. And she hated that particular group of people, who I won't mention, but join the dots, for the rest of her life. And that reverberated through the family. Hated. But it's not only because of that. What actually happened is that contracts, there was rich pickings during the war if you had a business, because you got government contracts. And they tended to get the government contracts where other people didn't. And it was a mystery until you found out who the civil servants were and some of the government ministers were, who were turning a blind eye, because a lot of these people had phony medical certificates to say they were unfit for military service when they were fit. But the government turned a blind eye. But anybody else, my word, you'd be in the army quicker than you could say Jack Robinson. And people noticed this. They noticed this strangeness. What is going on? Why is it that these people are getting away from military service, but other people are not? So there's a lot of resentment going on. Now, I'm not saying everybody, because a lot of these people of the lower order who are okay did serve at the front. But my mother worked for a firm called Lebeckins, and they were, and they made ammunition boxes. And she said all it was blokes of military age, all part of the family, with nothing much to do, wandering around and treating the staff like scum. And they weren't known by name. It was body. Get a body here, that body over there, get that body here. And what happened is there was a chap on a bandsaw, cut his finger off accidentally. And he was flaked out. They dragged him out, and obviously, I suppose he went to hospital. And they said, get a body over here. They grabbed my mother and put her on the bandsaw without any training, and there's blood all around. They didn't even bother mopping up because production. And the only time the workers got any peace, because it was a big factory, because it was war work, and you weren't allowed to leave your job at all. You had to keep on there, and the employers knew that, and they would stop the people's wages for any excuse possible. And when they went to the toilet, there was a chap, because I was bored, management was, these blokes were bored, had nothing to do, would time you how long you was in the toilet, and if you was there for 4 minutes instead of the designated 3 minutes, you got a little bit of pay docked. And there was a girl that had been bombed out of her house and lost a member of her family, sobbing her heart out, came into work, and they said, sorry, you got to have your pay docked. That's no excuse. Yeah, nice people, I don't think. And as I say, my mother had to work on this bandsaw. I mean, she was as thin as a rake. She was malnourished. She was, and she was a very sickly young girl when she was young. And there's all, you imagine, it was all blood all around it, and you had to carry on working on this bandsaw. And the only time the workers got any peace was when, this sounds weird, was when there was an air raid, because the management went straight down the shelters, but the workers had to carry on and brave the bombs. And they said, because there's barrage balloons above, oh, the bombers won't go through there. That's the only time they could sort of relax a little bit. But anybody that wasn't in, shall we say, the clan was basically filth beneath them. And they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked them. Another thing they used to do is that supposing you had a furniture manufacturer that got big and they needed to have metal components, let's say they're Watsits, and they needed to produce these Watsits, they would go to they'd have a contract from the government, and then they would go to a very small engineering works, one that could not possibly produce the quantity that they required. So they wanted 6 million of these Watsits. I'm just making that up. And this engineering works would think, wow, this is fantastic. So they would get a bank loan, and they would gear up to do these 6 million Watsits, and then the firm wouldn't pay them. And then the chaps would, and then they would get their legal people in and find clauses in the contract, and eventually that firm would go bankrupt, and the directors, if they were military age, would have to go into the military. And then suddenly part of the families, their brother or a relative, would take the firm over, and they would get all the machine parts and everything virtually for free at a knockdown price. And that's why these people were hated. And after the war, especially around North London, that they were the only people that about 90% of the businesses were owned by these people. And my father, when he came out of fighting for the war, he went for interviews for jobs, and he said to one chap, he said, well, I've been through the 6 years of frontline service. And this chap sat there, he said, you're tough luck, mate, I'll go out of it. That's why I got a nice business. You should have done the same. And the other insult he got was from another one, because you didn't have much choice. He said, look, I know what you've saved us, what's going on in Europe and that. You've saved us. And don't tell anybody else, but I'll pay you a little bit extra because of that. sort of wink, but keep it to yourself. So my dad thought, well, I've got a job here, you know. So he got this job, and there was a mix-up with the pay slips, because in those days they had pay slips, and he got somebody else's pay slips, and he found he was getting half the pay of everybody else. He'd been tricked. And he had that time and time again. A lot of other people got it time and time again. But going back to my great aunt who lost her husband in the war because somebody put him out of business, what happened is after the war, she her son was the star in her life because she'd lost her husband. There was a local councillor and bigwig who was a Freemason and was well in with, and he and his wife couldn't have children, and they wanted a child. And what happened, and this was just after the war, I think about 1946, something like that. My great aunt went to pick her son up from school, and he wasn't there. And she went to the teachers and she said, well, where's my son? Oh, he's been taken by your relatives. Pardon? Oh, my relatives? What do you mean? And then the people in the school said, oh, well, don't worry, you know, who's taken them? I don't know what. And she went delirious, obviously. And they called the police because she's going absolutely, I mean, a woman would do. You think you've lost your husband, now you've lost your son. And she was taken off to a mental asylum. And my uncle, who was the comedian, I think he was just demobbed from the army. He sorted it out, and he went and signed all the papers to get her out of this asylum. And he got her son back. Now, how he got that son back, I don't know, because my uncle was my dad's friend during the war, and my dad married his sister, which was later on my mother. And he was in the same unit as my dad. And they actually, because they were frontline intelligence, they had training that was more like commando training. They had to do unarmed combat. So you wouldn't mess with him with unarmed combat. So I don't know what my uncle did, but I think he may have found out where the son had been. And in those days, shall we say, you could do things a little bit more positive. And just after the war, that people are too worried about bombed out places and rebuilding Britain. So I think he got the son back. But I think he should, shall we say, put a little bit of pressure on the people to get the son back. And the story ends rather nicely because eventually my great aunt, she made contact with her old school love, the love, what do you call it? A school romance she had years ago, and they got together again. And I remember it's one of my earliest memories, and it must have been before I started infant school. And she had a fisherman's cottage in Nazing in Essex. And I remember going there with my parents. I could just about remember it. And when you walked into this cottage, I don't know does anybody remember Jack Hargreaves Out of Town? Well, that sort of decor, it was gorgeous. And it was all 1930s furniture. You would have thought it was early 1930s. And I can't fully remember. She was a lovely woman. And her son, who by that time was married, his wife looked after me. We went fishing for little tiddlers or something. I remember we put them all back afterwards. And because I think his wife wanted children, and I was very young at the time, so she sort of like mothered me for a little while, but I don't remember much of it. But that's quite an end to a tragic story. So she got her son back in the end, and they lived ever after, sort of thing. I don't know what happened with her son because we lost contact, and he'd be in his 80s now, so I don't know. But I thought that was quite a nice little story. But as I say, what I've just said about what happened during World War II and the way people were put out of business did create a very bad feeling towards some shall we say, psychopath element of a group of people. I think that's the politest way of putting it. And it's wrong to judge everybody as the same. And I'm not judging everybody as the same, because I take people as I meet them. If they're nice people, they're nice people. If they're scum, they're scum. And I don't really want to know them, and that's it. That's the way I look on everybody. I don't treat people by their race. But when they get up into business, sometimes they become, well, they are psychopaths, because it's the ruthless ones that get into business. And I think that, not all, but, and when you see what happens, then you can understand there's a lot of bad feeling. And going to that film, 1958, Dunkirk film, the original one, when Dickie Attenborough said there's some people that's making a lot of money out of this war, you can understand why the people in cinema cheered. But it's wrong, as I say, to tar everybody with the same brush. But I think I've explained it as well as I can, and I haven't got anything against anybody, unless they're a scumbag. And if they're a scumbag, doesn't matter what race or religion they are, they're a scumbag. And I think that our biggest enemy is psychopaths. Not all psychopaths. Some psychopaths don't harm human beings, but some do. And the ones that do are our greatest enemy, because what they do, they divide us. And that is how they've kept there for years. And that's how you got the New World Order and these ding-dongs using, with the usury scam. Anyway, I've waffled on a little bit here. Let's have a look at the chat room. Now we got here, Polar Beer. Oh no, this is interesting. Was it propaganda is everywhere? Yeah, it's a bit like dog poo, isn't it? You sort of step in it occasionally. Now, what have we got here? Monty Mole. Ask these death cult climate lunatics about the Right, hang on. Better have a glug of water before I can. Milankovitch cycles. I heard about that. That's quite interesting. Wasn't that? Was there a Russian chap that looked at these cycles? And they have nothing they can say aside from sloganeering. Yeah, I read something about that, Monty. You've reminded me. I can't say too much about it because I've forgotten a lot of it, but it is worth looking at. Yeah, you're quite right there. And then we've got KT. Hello, KT. Loved out of town. Say what you will, the countryside is still the only place where I would settle down. I agree with you. And it's a natural environment. And they've actually found, wearing my architectural hat, where they cut trees down, the vandalism and the crime rate goes up. Where they keep trees, it sort of stays at a level tolerance. And when you look at it, you look at these London suburbs where they cut the trees down, they sort of deteriorate overnight. We need trees. Let's face it, we are all animals, whether you like it or not. And for thousands of years, we lived amongst the trees. And it's only since we've become, inverted commas, I wouldn't say civilized, but since we started living in houses and towns and cities and things, which is only over, 500 years, probably less than that, that we've got away from nature. So, that's a sort of something these educated twits don't realise. Anyway, I think I've waffled on enough for this evening. I've really enjoyed this evening. Hello, we got another one through on chat. What is it? It's got the only climate change is the cloud seed. Yes, geoengineering governments do. Well, you're right there, because tell you what gets me is they're talking about bringing in electric cars and things like that. But you think of all that know-how, all that technology in vehicles. Now, a diesel vehicle is the most inefficient engine is a steam engine. I think it's 10% of the energy. You only get 10% of the energy out of it from what you put in. With a petrol engine, now I'm going on dodgy ground now. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but top of the list is diesel engines. They're very efficient because they burn most of the fuel. And now they've got diesel engines which are really super clean. And that technology is developing more and more and more. And it's a bit like coal-fired power stations. They've got scrubbers and all kinds of things like that. But I'll tell you another thing that these climate people don't mention: planned obsolescence. Now, surely if they're trying to save the planet, we'll have refrigerators that last for 30 or 40 years. I mean, I've recently got rid of a refrigerator I inherited from my parents, and it was a Frigidaire, and it was built in 1960, and I've still got the receipt, and it worked continuously apart from 2-week holiday we used to have every year from 1960, and it still worked when I got rid of it. But I had to get rid of it because the seals had gone, and I kept trying to patch the seals up, but it was like a sign of well, it was like a bacteria city, because the seals were leaking, and I tried everything to try because in those days they used to have these like airtight seals. They didn't have magnets around them, and I tried. I put magnets, I did everything, but unfortunately I kept fouling, and the hinges started to go. Oh, that was it. The catch went funny, and I repaired the catch, and it was a bit like a dog chasing its tail in the end. And I thought, right, I've got to bite the bullet. And I actually got another fridge, I think it was last year. So that's not bad, is it? From 1960 right the way through. It's like 60, 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010. So it's over 50, almost 60 years old. Yeah, 59 years old. Now, why can't they build fridges to last that long? I mean, if you've seen on YouTube the light bulb conspiracy, worth watching. And apparently, around the First World War, they built electric light bulbs that would last forever. And there's one in the fire station, I think it was put in there in 1907, and it still works. And every year they give it a birthday cake. You know, they have a birthday celebrations for this light bulb, which has been there since 1907. And what they did is they actually had an agreement with all the industry that they would make light bulbs that would only last a certain amount of time and then blow, because it was killing the industry. So they had to have planned obsolescence. And it was the same with ladies' nylons. And the scientists that invented nylons for ladies, which came out just before World War II, they have advertised, and they showed you a pair of ladies' nylons and a truck being towed by these nylons. They were so tough, and they never wore out. And the industry told the scientists to go back to the drawing board and make them so that they would wear out. And that's why, I don't know because I'm not a lady, but that's why, according to my girlfriends and that, told me that they tights that they bought were always flaming laddering and always. So that is something quite interesting. It's planned obsolescence. So if we're trying to save the planet, why have we got planned obsolescence? I mean, why aren't they saying, well, we'll keep all the petrol vehicles because, you know, to build electric cars is going to be more polluting, if it was true, which I don't, it isn't true. And they would be looking at it in that direction. So that's a question to ask them. Why have we got planned obsolescence? Why aren't you not mentioning anything about G5? Why aren't you mentioning anything about these chemtrails over the top? Why aren't you mentioning anything about ideological subversion and well, the next stage of capitalism is communism. That is how it evolves. You get capitalism and communism, because I said this last night. Capitalism is like a pyramid, and it actually survives on the stronger knocking out the weaker. So eventually what you get is these huge multinational companies, and at the top you've got the banks. And this is what we've got today. Now, you walk down your high street, it depends on where you live. I know up north it's a little bit different, but where I live, about 40 years ago, you had a choice of greengrocers, butchers, family-run businesses. How many family-run businesses are left now? Where I live, there's one butcher that's hanging on by his fingernails. All the greengrocers have gone. The only place you can get greens now, or fruit and veg, is either in the market or supermarket. You've got no other choice. And that is what communism is. You don't have choice. And they're trying to do away with the market now. They're doing everything possible to make it difficult for the stallholders. And I support them because I think markets are part of humanity, is part of what we are, you know. But it's all upside down thinking. And I actually put this down to the people in power today had their childhood in the 1960s and 70s. And what do we have in the 1960s and 70s? Free expression schools, Dr. Spock telling all these nonsense about how to bring children up who I think was a load of old tut. We had lunatics being put up as marvellous artists. Now, one particular artist he's not an artist, chap I can't stand is Andy Warhol. When I was at college, we called him Andy Arsehole. Yes. And because, I'm sorry, he wasn't an artist. Paints tins of soup, pictures of Marilyn Monroe. He was average, I suppose. But hyped up as this fantastic artist, that's not art. That's perversity. And what gets me is that these free expression schools didn't have any discipline. The kids did what they wanted. And those little brats that went through the free expression schools, they're in government today. And that's why you've got these dim-wit, educated twits that are sort of... I mean, when you look at the people in government now, I don't believe in government personally. They are not exactly the sharpest knives in the box, are they? I mean, and I've found there's a kind of reverse logic that they have. It's all sort of, for instance, they have people that are not qualified. Surely, Minister of Agriculture should be a farmer. They'll have some twit that's come out of university who will probably have difficult telling the difference between a turkey and a chicken. And they're telling farmers how to farm. Now, they're rewilding, and I'm hoping to get Sandy Adams on here. I know that Caroline's had Sandy Adams on as well, and we're hoping to do a big program on it. And Sandy was saying, and I don't want to take a leaf out of her book, that they are actually trying to put farmers out of business. Now, you think once they've gone out of business, that knowledge has gone forever. For example, cast iron. Now, we cannot cast iron the way the Victorians did. We don't know how they did it, but they got to a level of perfection where that's an art that's just gone, finished. We cannot replicate what they did. And then when you look along, for instance, I said this again, coal mining. Now, in the early 80s, or it was around about mid-80s that the miners' strike was on, they said that there's 400 years of coal reserves in this country. Now, and we had the safest coal. It's a very dangerous job, but we had the most safety, the most advanced coal industry in the world. It even put Europe, made that look primitive. And we had a very high safety record. And the miners just couldn't understand it. Now, if we had to open up those mines again, there's nobody around now who's got that expertise. They're either retired or dead, because those mines have been closing down since 80s. So you've got 40 odd years ago. So you wouldn't find them around. And there's a whole load of other industries. And you think when we got these silly electric cars, all the people that were producing conventional cars, not only they will lose their jobs, but also the supporting industries, the parts people, the cafes round near the garages the manufacturers, like up in where the Toyota plant is, they would go as well. Now, I've been thinking about doing a program where we kind of go back in time. Imagine going back to 1970, okay, 50 years. Now, in 1970, imagine we're in 1970 now. The pocket calculator is yet to be invented. There's no personal computers. All you had was 3 stations on television. That was BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. And they closed down, I think, at 12 o'clock at night. Then you had most people there was full employment near enough. There was nobody on the streets. There was always tramps. There's always been tramps that were sort of went roamers, and they were slightly eccentric perhaps. But the idea that people being homeless was unheard of in 1970. And I remember when I was, again, very young, I must have been about 5 or 4, my granddad, his mother lived to 100, just a couple of weeks before 103. And they say people are living longer nowadays. No, they're not. And excuse me one moment. And I went with my parents to her 101st birthday party. And she was in a nursing home in Romford. And it was a fantastic place. Now, it was run by the council. It wasn't private. And the building must have been relatively new for those days. And this was 60s. And they had these beautiful gardens. And they had them all laid out, beautiful ferns and that. And everybody had their own bedroom. There was a panoramic window. There's a window that went from floor to ceiling, and the bed was propped up. So the elderly person would wake up in the morning and the curtains would open and they could see these beautiful grounds with squirrels running around and ducks and the duck ponds. And some of the elderly people were walking around the grounds. And the people that tended those grounds were council workers who actually served an apprentice. Now, you go back to those days, and I'm talking about probably about 1970-ish, there was rates. There was no such thing as council tax. And I remember it was so low, people didn't really worry about it. You know, it didn't really cost much. It's pennies. But everybody was employed. Isn't that strange? And the reason why is because nowadays they got to pay 2 or 3 times, because they've got to get an outside contractor. And then this outside contractor, they've got to pay them. Then the director will need his paying. So things have become more expensive. Whereas if it was in-house, it'd be relatively cheap, which it was in those days. And as I say, rates weren't a big deal. And within your rates, you had the water rate, which was cheap. And I remember as a kid, my dad said, can you go down to the water board and get some washers? We need to change that tap. So I went down to the water board, and I was only a little nipper, about 7 or 8. I went, hey, sir, my dad's changing the tap washers. Have you got any taps? He said, what size? I said, I don't know. So he came along, went round, son, poured this load of tap washers in my hand. Yeah, that'd do. Didn't even ask whether I live locally, who I was or anything. I walked out with all these loads of tap washers. Still got them. And nobody asked any questions. Now, today, yes, you could buy 2 tap washers for a couple of quid in Wicks or somewhere, but it's all in a nice plastic container. In those days, no, it's a handful. Open your hands, wallop, in it went. Now, how comes we could do it then for pennies? It didn't cost hardly anything, but nowadays everything is so expensive when it comes to councils. And how comes that the elderly could be looked after like they were? What I saw and I witnessed in Romford with this absolutely fantastic nursing home, and again, it was council run, and the nurses there were, it was spotlessly clean. It was fantastic. And, you know, councils, they were proud of their gardeners. That garden, if you became a gardener in the council, you had to have sit an apprenticeship. You had to understand plants, and you had gardens and things. Now, where I live now, all it is some bloke with a chainsaw and someone behind them with a leaf blower. So the fella comes along, hacks everything down, doesn't matter because you don't know anything about gardening, and this bloke with a sort of going along with a leaf blower, blowing grass, weeds, muck everywhere. And when it rains, it all sort of clogs up the drains. So this is what we've got now. So I think we should ask a few questions. And as I've said many times before, if it was possible to have a time machine and we could speak to somebody from 1970, we would tell them that, well, we'd tell them the Vietnam War would end in 5 years, because the Vietnam War was going on and on and on. And from my readings, it was a inverted commas sustainable war. It's not meant to be won. And there's a lot of people, including me, that believe that that war was there to cull the population of youth in America. Because you notice it's mainly the blacks and the poor that went on, who were in the Vietnam War. And the posh people, their sons and that, did, shall we say, aircraft maintenance or in the Navy, where they weren't actually near the firing line as such. Some were, but weren't that far. And then you would tell that person, well, everybody's going to have a personal computer. Can you imagine trying to explain to a person of 1970 the way we live now? And you say you can't say certain things because that's hate speech. Now, people then said, it's a free country. We fought for a free country. You can say what you want. Can't now. You can't say what you want. And lots of people that have said what they think, and that they're actually sitting in jail at the moment for a thought crime. And if you don't believe me, just look it up. There are several people in jail, and they're not stupid. They're quite intelligent people. Now, can you imagine that? That would be a very interesting program, wouldn't it? And I've been thinking about this, where they could actually do something where, obviously, we can't invent a time machine, but somebody could act the part of 1970 or vice versa, and somebody would be the person from today. And I can guarantee that person from 1970 would say, no, never, I don't believe you. It'd be like going on the Titanic and saying to people, it's going to hit an iceberg and it's going to sink. And they go, good, I don't believe you. This ship is unsinkable. And it's a bit like what they talk about conspiracy theories today. You know, no, I don't believe it. No, it's a load of old rubbish. Anyway, I'll be waffling on almost an hour now, and I'll have a look in the chat room. Let's have a look at some interesting stuff here. There's some interesting stuff. Katie, what we got? We spoke to a gas engineer today, and he put in a new boiler yesterday that had a 10-year guarantee. He saw no chance of this removal program working. Well, that's very good. Yeah, I see that, Katie. But I'll tell you something else. Those people, if it comes true, will be out of work, won't they? Because, and you look at these smart meters. Well, I don't want electromagnetic smog in my house. I've already got enough in there. People that read the meters, they'll be out of work as well. So, and you think all that technology that's gone to the gas engineering, gone. So, and if they just phase it out gradually, you won't be able to find a corgi engineer. That's the for people overseas. That is the sort of what they're going to be registered with. Nothing to do with dogs or anything like that. You have to be corgi registered to deal with gas. So that's a very good point. Now we got another one here. Newly released study shows 1 out of 3 climate activists is just as stupid as the others. I like that one. 2043. Brilliant. Oh, that is a beauty. Right, what we got here? Rembrandt, he was not. No, don't answer that one, Monty. You're probably answering somebody else, right? Academia is, in essence, a group of dogs chasing their own tails and sniffing each other's backsides. Well, that's true. Yeah, that's very, very true. Now let's have a look here. Katie, Ernst and Young, the accountant, we've got to be a bit careful when I mention names, allegedly, are busy working out their carbon taxes for everyone, including taxing for cows grazing on grass. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? A flatulence tax. So vegetarians would be on a super tax, wouldn't they, really, when you think about it? Well, this brings me on to, I want to get, as I say, a proper climate scientist onto the program. As I say, not a Mickey Mouse one. So I've thought about this now. Was it Gary Lineker gets how many million or so from the BBC, and all these people on the BBC on fantastic salaries. So I've decided to look into the Eric Von Essex Fund to see what we could pay a real climate scientist who knows the stuff, not a Mickey Mouse one like David Attenborough, who isn't a scientist. And I've looked at this carefully, and I think that I've got a nice package. So this is what I'm thinking of offering. I've got a cheese sandwich, which I bought from a supermarket a couple of days ago. Hasn't been opened. It's 2 days out of date. And providing he or she scrapes the green bits off, puts it under the toast, it should be okay. So that's right. That's something I could pay. And the other one that comes out of budget will be a handful of Smarties, not the full tube, because, couldn't afford that much. And also a free ride on my push bike. And it's got a bell on it. It goes ding, 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 ding. So that's all right, isn't it? So any climate scientist, proper one, I'm not talking about the Wally ones, not the ones paid for allegedly by the government, but a real climate scientist that wants to come on, just think of those bonuses they can get. I am joking. But no, seriously, it would be nice to get someone that really knows their stuff. I'm not a climate scientist, but obviously I'm not. But I think that, I want to find out about this percentages that this fake global warming ding-dongs use. I want to find out more about that. Now let's go on. Katie, she's got another one here. Ernst and Young, the accountants. I've already read that one out. Oh, no, sorry, Katie. What am I doing? Right. What we got here? I have 100-year-old hand planes, and there is no doubt the iron and steel is, yes. Isn't that funny you should say that, Monty? Because I do a lot of practical work as well as theoretical. And my tools are very, very old. I've got, well, I'll tell you what I've got a pickaxe from the 1920s that my uncle had. And my uncle used to work for the railways. I don't know whether it was a staff gift or what it was, but it's absolutely, the iron in it is, I think it's cast iron, is it? No, yeah, I think it is iron. It's absolutely fantastic pickaxe. And I've also got planes that are Victorian. I've also got screwdrivers. I've got 2 screwdrivers, and this is a funny story. When my dad was a teenager, he went to Woolworths and he bought a screwdriver. Bought 2 screwdrivers. Well, he bought 1 screwdriver and then later he bought another one. And people laughed at him. They said, "Got it from Woolworths, a load of old rubbish that is. I thought a bits in no end, no time at all. You want to get a quality one." Now, that was before World War II. I still use it. It's got a wooden handle. It's had the most terrible abuse. It's opened paint cans. It's used as a chisel sometimes. It's as solid as a rock. You would not get. I mean, how many times you get one of these Chinese screwdrivers that's like sort of pressed tin foil? They're awful, terrible things. And this is another thing by what I was saying about capitalism turned to communism. You notice you don't get quality now. It's very difficult to get quality. Most things have a life expectancy built into them. I mean, I went along to a famous shop where you only spend 1 coin to get your things because I needed a particular screwdriver bit, which I couldn't get anywhere. And it was Saturday and this market wasn't there. And I'll get something there. I got this particular, I know what it was. It was, they've got a new bit because you've either got the Phillips screw type head or you've got the standard type heads. Well, this is like a sort of a fancy thing. It's really weird, it is. But anyway, I needed one of those bits. I lost mine down the back of a radiator or somewhere. I went to this particular shop where you only spend 1 coin, and I put it in the screw to undo it, and it just went. It was, but it's like soap. It was. You just thought it was useless. And you look at the amount of took now. For example, pardon me, you buy tools. And most of the time, they're absolute rubbish. Now, I've got a wharf drill that my father bought in the 1940s, late 40s. And it still works. Electric drill. Fantastic. And I use it for screwing things in and things like that. Now, all those years, there's no planned obsolescence there. There's loads of things like that. I inherited my father's toolkit because he was a keen DIY. And what I do now, I do less architectural work. I do more practical work for clients. And what I do is, for example, that sounds good, isn't it? Practical work. No, what I mean to say is I make sundials and ornamental stuff, gates and things that all people wouldn't really be bothered with that I do. And I enjoy it, really. I enjoy my work. So I do a little bit of the theoretical on the architectural side. I do a little bit of the practical, but I do it on my own and I don't employ anybody or anything like that. And I wouldn't employ anybody because I found out long ago, I'm not a businessman, never will be, never have been. I mean, I've run some businesses, yeah, and I found out I'm not a businessman because to be a businessman, you need a certain amount of ruthlessness, and I've got too much compassion for people. And if it's just somebody has got much money, say, "Oh, yeah, you have that for free." We can't do that in business, and I do. So that's it. But that's another story. And I think you learn about yourself in the end. And I think I've got a very clear conscience. And I think that if you can go through life smiling and spreading a joke, and I think that's the way we're going to beat this new world order, is to laugh at them because they are funny, absolutely funny. I mean, look what we've got now. As I say, going back to what I said earlier, you imagine talking to somebody of 20 years ago and telling them they're going to have transvestites teaching infants in school. They'll go, you're sick saying that. Of course they're not. So yes, they are. And they think it's perfectly okay to have these people. Now, can you imagine that happening, say, 100 years ago? parents, they wouldn't, they would just drag such a person out and chase them out of town or lynch them, because they knew what was right and what was wrong. And it's wrong to fill, especially little toddlers' heads with sexual matters. That comes later, not at that early age. And when you look at, I mean, I haven't got a television now, and I haven't had one for the past 10 years or so, and I don't miss it. But occasionally, if I do see a snatch of television, if I'm, say, they've got a big television screen in the bank sometimes, and if I'm queuing up there, if the, you know, the machine's gone wrong, I have to queue, they have the BBC 24 pumping out garbage all day. And it, oh, God, I try not to look at it. Anyway, oh, hang on. You're right, Monty, it's a talk spit. Yeah, actually, Monty, do you like those talk spits? I kind of like them, unless you buy, unless you lose. If you get them from Toolstation, free advert here for Toolstation, you get a free bit in it. They're a little bit more expensive, but if, like me, you keep losing it and you need another one, don't go to a shop where you can buy it for £1 because you're wasting your money. And that's right, Talk Bits. And where are we? Oh, I'm a self-taught woodworker. It's good for your soul. I agree with you. It is very good for your soul. And well, I'll give you an example. Got a client wanted an unusually sized door, and an ordinary builder wouldn't be bothered with it. Well, I actually built the door on the frame, and you can't find a door like what I built, and things like that. So I do all the unusual stuff, and it really is. It makes you feel good, and I like working with timber. It's really, you know, it is very good for your soul. I agree with you there, Monty. And it was humour does cut through nonsense. Yes, it does. I mean, can you imagine all the? I mean, Mark talks about these facilitators in these citizens' assemblies. Can you imagine if they said, right, okay, we've got to do this, and everybody went and started laughing at them? What could they do? Just think about that. What could they do if everybody just creased up laughter? It's difficult, isn't it? Because they ain't got a sense of humour. And I think we should laugh and laugh and laugh at them. Now, what have we got here? Yes, people would have stood up in the masses to stop madness that we are sleepwalking into. Well, it's talking about a cup of tea, because I'm going to waffle on about communism a bit now. But when you think what this country's been bombarded with, we were infiltrated, I think, as far back as the 1920s, as soon as the 1917 revolution in Russia happened. And remember, that revolution was not organized by Russians. It was organized outside of Russia and financed by Wall Street. When you look at things from a different perspective, once that, from 1917, once that was done and dusted, from the 1920s, my grandfather witnessed the Labour Party being infiltrated. There was the national strike, and then they reckoned that in the universities, I mean, there was those 4 traitors that were working for Russia, who were at university in the early 30s. And the White House was infiltrated, because when you think about it, ideological subversion is incredibly effective. And then we come forward and we've had, you know, universities being bombarded with garbage. And what shocks most people is that the hippie thing of the 1960s of peace and love, I was, well, sort of 70s with me, I was sucked in, but I thought, oh, isn't it lovely? Peace and love, putting a flower down a rifle and all that. It was actually the brainchild of the KGB. And, you know, a lot of these, that movement of the late 70s, there was mods and rockers. Some people say that was the Soviets. I don't know about that, but I do know that oh dear, what was it when they had the coxcomb hair and things like that? It was in the late 70s it came about, and it was probably the worst time for teenagers ever. And Johnny Rotten was running it and all this, that and the other. Oh, can't think of the name of it now, but somebody will come along to tell me. That's it. It's right. Try it, Monty. No movement is organic. Well, they reckon there was 97% of movements now are government run. I don't know where they get the percentage from. Anyway, we've got here, Monty. Love them, Chris. They are all very good if you're making jigs when you need to remove screws. Oh, yeah, you're talking about Torx bits. Yeah, I like them. I've already got into them. The screws, they do not come out or shear as easy as positive Phillips. Yeah, I agree there. I found them to be very good. I was absolutely surprised. Did you know that Phillips screws only came about in the 1930s? Before that, it was all the standard single slot. And apparently they have a square slot in Canada, which is still being produced, where you have screws which have got like a square slot in them, which is quite interesting. Well, just for me. Man has been working wood for as long as we have been here. That's correct. And punk, that's it, Katie, the punks. Why couldn't I think of that? I think that was the worst ever. And there's a lot of evidence that it was, again, the KGB. Because how do you destroy a country? You can destroy it from within. Easy peasy, isn't it, really? Once you get in, it's like pushing a ship away from the harbour. Once you start to subvert a country, it's virtually unstoppable because it starts to subvert itself. And this is what we've got now. We've got the remnants of that. And how we're going to stop that, as I've said many times before, with great difficulty. Because the first thing anybody would have to do, peacefully and lawfully, if they can, is to get to the media. Once they've taken over the media, they've got hold of the biggest weapon ever. And let's face it, what the BBC pumps out, the propaganda, how people believe that garbage, I'll never know. Anyway, I better wind up now. And we got here what we got. We got Real Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by Dave McGowan. Oh, sorry, read Weird Scenes Inside. Oh, sorry, Monty, my eyes. Read Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by David. I will. And I've got here Or Musical Truth by Mark Devlin. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes. Apparently it's at a frequency that does something to your mind. It's quite frightening, actually. But when you look at it, imagine we were all Martians, or I don't know, something from outer space. Imagine we were all ET, and we come land to us, say, "What is this strange place, Earth?" You know, and you'll probably say, you know, if you landed on this planet, so I've been traveling 40 million light years. Can I use your toilet, please? Sorry. Correct that one. But joking aside, just think about it. First World War wiped out millions of people. And who was it? The government, because this country was not under any military threat at all. First World War, we had a Royal Navy that could have blown the American Navy out of the water. We could have blown the German Navy probably out of the water, and the German knew that. And it's true what a historian said, Clark, I think it was Kenneth Clark. Yeah, Kenneth Clark, I think it was years ago. Not the MP. Well, he was an MP, but it was one, his father was a historian as well. And he said Britain could have set back, supplied both sides, Germany and France, and just watched Europe boil wash. We made a fortune. Now, you think of what the First World War did. It wiped out the vast majority of the male population. And in the 20s and 30s, there was a shortage of men, and women found it very difficult to find a man, which is quite good for me, you know. Now, yes, that would be done. And apparently there's still a shortage of men, so I'm very pleased about that. So yeah, that's good. That's one good thing about them pushing homosexuality. There's more women for people, for me. Anyway, joking aside, you think about it. Second World War wiped out millions of people. And the 20th century, more people were killed by their own governments than all the wars put together. Governments are very, very dangerous. This is what I think we could do without them. And people say, oh, it'd be anarchy. No, not necessarily, because we're like junkies, like drug addicts. We've been told that we need governments. No, because when you vote, well, not really, because I think it's rigged, you're handing responsibility over for your life to someone else. And when you look at the ding-dongs in power, would you really want them to be responsible? You imagine if they was responsible for your house. Be a bit frightening, wouldn't it? Well, first of all, they'd open the door, they'd take the lock off, and then invite everybody from around the world into your house. So it's a jolly fun here, you know, and there are people sleeping in the bath. So can I use the car, see, please? No, you're 25th in the queue, you know. But on that jolly note, thank you very much for joining me this evening, and it's been great fun, and I've been waffling on as usual, and thanks to everybody in the chat room. We've got some really great people here tonight, and thanks Monty and Sooty and Katie and who else? I've got loads of people I could mention here, but thank you to everybody. You've done it's fantastic, and join me again on Tuesday. I'll be speaking to Caroline on Tuesday. Next Thursday I'll be on. I've been in touch with Mark, so we don't know whether we'll be talking. So you might. So if you've got insomnia, you can tune in to me if I'm on my own. If not, I'll probably be on with Mark. And what we've got planned for the future is something like a kind of discussion thing where there's more than 2 people. I think any more than 4, I don't think the bandwidth would work, you know. But anyway, Katie and Monty and Sooty and everybody else, thank you very much for joining me. It's been great talking to you, and I'll be back next Tuesday with Caroline and next Thursday at the same time. And thank you very much for joining me. Oh, by the way, Tuesday it'll be 8 o'clock with Caroline, and next Thursday it'll be 7 o'clock. And thank you and good night.